Chapter 11. The glory of young men is their strength, and the beauty of old men is the gray head. Proverbs 20:29. As Solomon guided his steed down the trail toward town, he became aware of a greater concentration of houses, huts, and different kinds of buildings. Abishag's residence was at the very edge of plantable land. As Solomon descended into flatter terrain, wheat and barley replaced the grapevine, and he noticed workers out in the fields tending the crops. If he could see them, they could see him. He became conscious of his appearance and that of his brilliant horse, which would certainly attract the attention of passers-by on the trail. It was suddenly urgent that he find a way to blend in, but he needed his mount badly. He could not travel without it. He pulled up near a grove of trees and considered what to do, looking all around him. Then Solomon noticed a brook watering the grove. His eyes followed its path up through a draw in the hills. If there was a brook, there would surely be livestock nearby. He broke from the trail and followed the brook up the draw. After passing through a narrow, the draw widened into a hidden canyon. He found himself on a sheep trail that wound its way up the canyon alongside the brook. Upon rounding a bend, a farmyard became visible at the end of a long field. Sheep and goats grazed in the canyon. A livestock farm. Solomon nudged his horse forward, trotting him out across the field toward the house and barn. Shammai, the aged livery farmer, looked up from the hide he was tanning to see a strange rider approaching from across the fields. He squinted at him, wiping the sweat from his forehead with the back of his hand. What was this? He placed the hide back into the tanning brine and rinsed off his hands in a bucket of water. It was not every day that a visitor was found all the way up here, and an unusual-looking visitor at that. Shammai walked out toward the approaching rider and stopped to lean on a wooden rail fence surrounding a stone water trough. As the visitor drew closer, Shammai saw that the horse was truly splendid, and that the rider sat him like a king. The mounting equipment was of excellent quality also. "Shalom," Solomon called out as he approached the old farmer. "Shalom," the man replied, looking curiously up at the stranger and then down at his magnificent steed. "I am Shammai of Issachar. Whom do you seek, my lord?" "Well, I am called Jedediah," he replied. "I have traveled far, and I am in search of care and boarding for my horse. Do you know where I might find a stable?" The farmer studied the rider's face. "Care for your horse, you say," he said, allowing himself a long look at the mount. "My lord, I have been caring for livestock for 40 years, and I do not believe I have ever seen a stallion equal to yours." "No doubt. It is used to much better care than can be provided here, but we do have some basic things. There is not much care for livestock here in Bill Heyman country, but the best you will find is right here in my stable. Where are you traveling, if I may ask, and how long do you wish to stay?" "I would like to rest my horse, my lord, for the night, at least, but I also must visit town before sundown. If you would permit me to borrow a donkey, I would be willing to leave my horse with you as security," Solomon said. The man chuckled in disbelief. He looked back at the horse, standing majestically with its deep chest, clear eyes, and perfect behavior. It showed no sign of needing a rest. "Your horse has security for my donkey?" he asked. "And just how will I be assured that you will not disappear with my donkey and leave me stuck with this horse of yours? Your offer leaves me with too little risk, my lord, and that I find risky." Solomon smiled at the man, discerning the sense in this objection. An elderly Israelite deserved a certain amount of forthrightness. Though their conversation had been short, Solomon had already decided that he could trust the man. "My lord, you are Shammai of Issachar, as you say, an Israelite of distinguished birth. I am Jedediah of Judah, and I am en route to Jerusalem on the business of your king. But I travel alone. I carry gold, my lord, and I am not known in this land. I fear if I ride a stallion such as this into a poor village, I may as well wear my gold on my sleeve, for I will surely attract the attention of the trail raider. Besides which, I I have another problem." With that, Solomon pulled up the cloak that was hanging down to reveal his bootless foot. The man peered at his wrapped ankle. "My lord, my ankle is broken, I do fear," he said, "and I am in search of a physician. I am in no position to defend myself should the need arise. If you be so kind as to care for my horse and loan me a donkey, I will certainly pay you fairly," Solomon said.
"That is an answer I can believe,"
the man responded, breaking away from the rail and heading toward the barn. "Come this way and I'll provide what you need." Solomon found Shammai of Issachar to be exceedingly helpful once his trust had been won. A noble man, worthy of his noble name, he fixed Solomon up with a young, steady mount. The man's wife, a lovely little woman by the name of Ruth, came out then and refreshed him with cold water and a satchel of food to take on his way. Then Shammai helped Solomon mount up again and gave him clear directions on just how to locate the one and only physician who practiced in Shunem,
a man by the name of Yakshan.
As Solomon was turning to ride out, the man stuck a long, thick shepherd's cane into his hand. "You may find this helpful," he grinned. "That is, if you have any intention to dismount when you arrive." Solomon laughed, thanked the kindly old man and his wife,
and headed back toward town in search of Yakshan, the physician.
With his woolen cloak wrapped around him, his simple turban on his head, and the shepherd's cane in his hand, he attracted no attention at all as he traveled down the path on his newly acquired donkey. It was now mid-afternoon, and as the trail neared the city proper, it became increasingly crowded with laborers, women carrying water, and domestic animals. Shunem had no city wall, being just a little hamlet in the hills, but in the custom of many small towns, it boasted a stone arch in lieu of a gate at its entrance. Without this, it would be difficult to discern the entrance, for the town blended into the countryside around it. Next to the gate, on the inside, stone benches were situated, where the leaders of the city met to judge cases. On a day like today, the benches were used as hitching posts, places to set bundles while loading up animals, and for various other less distinguished uses. Nonetheless, there were a few graybeards lounging there, happy to spend the day watching the simple commerce that passed by. Being locals, they knew well all who passed on a normal day and noted curiously the unknown shepherd on the donkey. Solomon found the main street of Shunem to be typical of those in dozens of villages in rural Israel. It led to a central square which featured a vegetable market and a few shops with various other kinds of wares. Nothing too exotic. A leather shop, a metalsmith, and shops of miscellaneous handmade goods, sandals, clothing, baskets, according to the talent of the local population. Nothing imported was displayed. The only thing that distinguished Shunem from any other Israelite towns of its size was its disproportionate number of drinking rooms, owing, no doubt,
to the easy availability of grapes for the making of wine.
Solomon blended into the mid-afternoon crowd, following the landmarks given him, toward a stone building off the main market area,
where Yakshan the physician made his practice.
Back at their home, Abishag and her mother were concerned about the missing guest. They found the horse tracks leading up to the house and away, and they knew that the visitor had no horse. They also realized he had left without taking any provisions from the house that they could tell.
They knew that he did not have any supplies with him and that he was injured.
Was he a man on the run, and had his pursuers caught up with him? He did not strike Abishag as that kind of man. If he was kidnapped, she tended to believe he must be the innocent party, chased by evildoers, but she could not explain why. He just seemed above that. But why would an injured man leave a comfortable house, taking no provisions with him,
of his own free will?
It did not make any sense. As the day stretched toward evening, their puzzlement drifted toward worry. Finally, with little light left in the day, Abishag declared, "I'm going down to town."
"Well, it's getting late, dear."
"I realize that. That is why I should be going now if I'm going to be going at all."
And what will you do when you get there?"
Abella asked.
"I don't know exactly. Perhaps I will inquire at the gate, see if anyone has seen him. A man with a broken ankle would be memorable if seen, don't you think? He may be my brother, after all. Must I not try?" Her mother glanced out apprehensively at the diminishing day.
"Be careful, please."
As Solomon neared his destination, the crowd thinned a bit, and he came upon a row of beggars gathered outside a building. Many of them were children, dressed in tattered rags, peering up at him out of dark hoods. Also in this area were the infirm, lame, crippled, blind, and generally unfit to work. There was not a great number of them, but the sight troubled him nonetheless. Such open misery was not seen in Jerusalem, particularly nowadays when wealth was abundant. His own hospital had cleared the streets of most of the infirm, and children were always cared for in Jerusalem. He moved on, leaving the compassion that welled in him unsatiated for the moment. As Solomon drew closer to the building of the physician, he observed that it was, in fact, a busy place. Oddly, smoke ascended from its chimney stack, though it was not cold. Benches were situated outside the door, and a peculiar collection of humanity sat along them. He rode up and ducked down to glance through the open door, discovering that the small waiting room inside was also full.
"Excuse me, Lord," called a woman from a nearby bench. "I don't think they will let you ride your donkey in there, and even if they did, I've been waiting here since this morning, and—"
Suddenly, she let loose with a horrific-sounding cough and continued to hack for several moments. Solomon recognized the disease instantly. It was a lung infection, commonly contracted from those who traveled in Africa. He had studied it and written about it, and treatment in Jerusalem had all but wiped out the disease there. It thrived in humid climates, which made it odd to see such an advanced case on the outskirts of Jezreel in the summer. "You have the African swamp fever," he declared, almost out of habit.
"That's not what Yakshan calls it," she croaked. "But anyway, I was saying there are a lot of us in line here, and you better be prepared to—"
Again, she launched into a fit of coughing. Solomon looked around at the folks waiting and soon realized the majority of those present had the same infirmity. The swamp fever was hard to treat, not because the germ was hard to kill, but because the treatment required was opposite of that which supplied the patient relief. The more humid the climate, the more relief came to the patient's lungs, but also the greater the progress of the disease. While most infections of this type were treated with moist air, this one was unusual in that it required dry. The germ could be killed if the patient were fed a healthy diet and made to breathe hot, dry air, as in a kiln. A swallow of an oil-based ointment several times a day could moisten the throat enough to provide relief from the pain until the germ perished. A man sauntered out of the building, perspiring, his face flushed red as though he had come out of a hot bath. He appeared very relaxed and wandered away with a dreamy expression on his face, as though he had just been relieved of great suffering. Solomon caught a whiff of mint spices on his clothing as he drifted by and disappeared around a corner.
"All right, who is next?"
a young, sincere-looking man called from inside the doorway. A chorus of voices responded, but in the end, one person was singled out, and the room calmed down again. "Excuse me, daughter," Solomon said to the woman who had spoken to him. "What kind of treatment are they giving you in there?"
"Steam bath," she croaked. "Yakshan has a special herb bath that is the only thing that works on this ailment."
"Steam bath?" She looked at him strangely.
"Yes, that's right, steam bath, and don't think you're getting in there ahead of me."
He eyed her expertly. This was not turning out to be a very fruitful trip. One doctor in town, and he could not get in to see him, even if he could, from what he was hearing. He did not know if he wanted to. He looked around at the waiting crowd. This appeared to be a one-ailment clinic. If anyone were to come with any other kind of problem, such as he just had, there was little chance they could even get in. He looked back down at the woman. "Tell me, dear woman, just how long have you had this ailment?"
1.5 years, she answered.
Yakshan says it's getting better and that I just have to be patient and let the treatment work, but I'm running out of money to pay for it.
Her disease was reaching a critical stage. Solomon knew that by now a large portion of her lungs was in danger of being permanently destroyed. If she did not stop the progress of the disease soon, she would be beyond recovery. "Looks like you have an epidemic here," he said, motioning to the people around him.
"Yes, and it looks like you are not from around here," she answered. "Listen, I don't want to be rude, but it's been a week since my last treatment, and it's really painful to talk right now, so if you don't mind." She began coughing again. Solomon shook his head in disgusted amazement. What kind of doctor would continue to prescribe the same treatment year after year when it was obvious it was not working? He swung his donkey around and headed back toward the market. If his leg was going to be set, it looked like he would have to do it himself. He worked his way back toward the main street, looking for a shop that could provide him with the necessary supplies. He passed a bakery, and the smell of fresh bread wafted out toward him as a wave of heat from the fire oven hit his face. Farther on, he found a basket shop next to a lamp dealer. Solomon took his staff and leaned off the donkey, putting his weight on it. Then he swung his injured leg around behind the animal and slid down the rod, landing on his good foot. He wrapped the reins to a post and hobbled into the basket shop. A plump little woman was working there. "What can I help you find?"
she asked. "Well, I don't need a basket, but I need some basket supplies if you are willing to sell them. Do you have bamboo rods?"
"Going to make your own basket, eh?"
No. I need them for something else." He knew the rods could be placed around his ankle and then bound together with a cloth to keep the bones straight once he had them set in place.
"Well, I don't have bamboo rods, but how about these dried vine stalks?"
she asked, holding up some thick, dark brown stalks. Solomon tested them in his hands. They would serve his purpose, though unconventional. He paid the woman and hobbled back out of the shop to continue on his donkey. Glancing down at the lamp seller's table, he noticed some flasks of various oils. He dismounted to smell them, then selected one and bought it, flask and all, along with several pinches of selected spices from another nearby merchant. He sprinkled the spices into the flask and shook it up, letting them soak into the oil in a thick mixture. Then, with some effort, he hoisted himself into the donkey again and headed back down the street. Stopping by the bakery, Solomon called through the door. A fat little man poked his head out. "What do you want?" "I apologize, my lord," Solomon explained, "but my leg is injured and it pains me much to mount and dismount this donkey." "I see," the man said. "Well, what can I do for you?" "A loaf of fresh bread, if you don't mind," Solomon said. The man disappeared for a moment, then came back with a wrapped bundle. "That'll be 2 garras." Solomon reached into his pouch. He didn't have much small change. He just used up all the small coins with his last 2 purchases. The smallest he had was a 1 mina gold piece, but Israelite commerce trafficked in silver only. Solomon did some quick math. His smallest gold member was worth 2,500 times the man's price for the bread. He pulled out the gold piece and held it low where the man could see it. The little baker's eyes widened. "I don't suppose you have change, do you?" Solomon asked. "Friend, I would have to sell bread for a year before I could see a mina's worth of gold," the man answered. "No, I do not have change for that." "Well, in that case, perhaps we can agree on an arrangement," Solomon said. "Would you benefit from some hired help?" "Excuse me?" "My lord, I need your fine bread, but I have no change with which to buy it. So if I give you this gold piece, you owe me something in return, do you not?" Solomon asked. "Yes, that goes without saying, but I already told you I don't have any change." "What I am suggesting is that you pay me back by hiring someone I know who needs a job. You can use the change to pay them. Tell me, who keeps your fire room hot?" "Well, I do," he replied. "I do all the work here myself." "Well then," Solomon replied, May I suggest that you let someone else tend your fire for a couple of weeks? A hardworking man like yourself would appreciate a lighter workload for a time, would you not?
You got that right, he replied. Look, I don't know why you want that loaf of bread so bad, but if it makes you happy, I'll play along. Send your man over.
It's a woman, Solomon replied. And you must do one other thing for me. Do not let her in the front of the store where the bread is. Just employ her out back, in the fire room. She can keep the fire hot for you. Can you promise me that?
Sure, whatever you say, friend,
the man replied with a pleased but bewildered look on his face. Solomon explained how much to pay the woman for her service, which would leave the man with plenty left over, in case Solomon decided to use his services again. As he was riding away, the man motioned quickly to a neighboring merchant and began talking to him excitedly about what had just happened. Solomon rounded the corner and came upon the street that was home to Yakshan, the physician's healing room. Sun had lowered to a steep angle, causing the streets between buildings to be in full shadow. Soon the air would be cooling. He approached the woman he had been speaking to before. She was still waiting in line, her head bowed down into her clothing, a hoarse sound emanating from her lungs as she breathed. "Excuse me, dear woman," Solomon said. She looked up at him.
You again?
"Yes, daughter. I've been thinking about your problem, and I found a way for you to get some money for your treatment." She stared at him uncertainly. "Would you step over this way for just a moment?" he asked, wanting to get her away from the listening crowd.
Oh, very well, she resigned herself with an irritated shrug. I'm not going in for a while anyway.
She dropped her travel satchel by the wall to save her place in line. When they had moved a few paces away from the crowd, Solomon asked her, "How many treatments would 12 silver shekels buy you?" She laughed and then coughed.
Well, that would get that would get me about 3 months' worth, but where am I going to get 12 silver shekels?
"I will tell you," he said, "but first, may I ask you to do one thing for me?"
And what is that?
He pulled out the flask of mixture. "Kindly take 2 swallows of this, not all at once, but hold it in your mouth for a moment, and then 2 swallows, very slowly." She eyed him warily.
What is it?
"It's a natural remedy, oil-based, with a bit of spice mixed in, this and that. Here, smell it." The woman leaned forward and sniffed. She said, recognizing the smells as fairly common. Then she looked up at him, still skeptical. Solomon reached into his pouch and pulled out another gold piece, casually flipping it in his thumb and forefinger. Her eyes followed its movements until she grabbed the flask with some violence and tipped it up, taking it down just as he had directed. The ointment seeped down her throat like warm honey, giving her instant relief. She looked back up at him with wonder.
Who are you?
"I am King Solomon." She smirked.
Right, and I'm the Queen of Sheba. You tempt me with relief and then tease me with nonsense. Who are you, really? Some kind of doctor? Where'd you get this medicine?
"I suppose I am a doctor of sorts, but my name, that is more complicated." She eyed him suspiciously.
Ah, hiding from the law, eh? Very well, then. I won't ask you any more questions, but could you at least give me the recipe for your potion?
"The recipe? No. I am afraid that is a secret, but I can offer you something better. A way for you to obtain the money you need. Do you know the baker?"
Borneo? Yes, of course I know the baker.
"I have spoken to him in your behalf. He is going to hire you to tend his fire for a few weeks. Your pay will be 12 shekels. She stared at him in disbelief, frozen in place as if in a trance. "Do you want me to take you over there too?"
No, she replied. But, what do I tell him?
"Just tell him you were sent to tend his fire. Trust me, he will know what to do. He's waiting for you."
All right, my lord, she replied with a bit more respect. And thank you, my lord.
And one more thing, Solomon said. Kindly take this flask of medicine too.
Well, by all means,
She replied, holding her hand to her chest, where the soothing ointment was, even now warm inside her. She reached out with her hand to take the flask, but Solomon pulled it back. But you must do one more thing. Promise me.
I promise,
she blurted, realizing afterward that she had no idea what he was going to ask. You must stay out of Yakshin's healing room for that full time. She blinked at him.
But
4 weeks, Solomon commanded with all the presence of the king he was resounding in his voice.
Yes, my lord,
she reacted instinctively, surprising herself that she submitted to his commands so quickly. The man had a certain air about him, one that seemed to inspire obedience, even when she didn't know him.
I mean, thank you, my lord,
she added quickly. That's better now. After you have done as I said, I will return and give you more of this medicine. Solomon turned and spurred his donkey down the street and around the corner, leaving her to stare at him in wonder. The sky was darkening. As Solomon proceeded back toward the market, he realized the city was transforming around him. Some of the merchants were closing up shop, and others were already gone. The crowd was thinning of children and women, while working folks, who had little interest in shopping, were making their way directly toward their destinations for the evening. Solomon caught a whiff of the cold air he had experienced the night before, and now discerned its source. Down below the city were the swamps, and up from them an occasional gust of cool, moist air braced his skin. As some shops closed, others opened, and torches were lit and flickered over some doorways. Solomon was hungry. He wondered what Abishag and her mother's reaction would be when they came home and found him gone. He would return, but his absence would require an explanation. They would want to know where he had gone and why. And where did he get this donkey on which he would come riding? His stomach growled. He set his attention toward finding something to eat before returning to the vineyard farm. Then he remembered the package of trail foods that the kindly farmer's wife had sent with him. He searched inside his clothing for it as he moved back up toward the center of town. Just then, a beggar scurried up to him with his hand out, limping awkwardly on a lame leg. "Mercies for the poor," he asked, his eyes looking up earnestly. Solomon looked around. Other beggars were crouched at the wall, watching carefully. No doubt they recognized him as a stranger and wanted to find out if he was favorable toward their needs. Solomon pulled out a couple of ripe figs. "Tell me," he asked the man, "how did you get into this condition?" The beggar eyed the figs. He would prefer money, but food was never to be refused. "I must tell you in order to get those?" he asked. Solomon handed the figs to him. "No, you need tell me only because I asked." Solomon recognized that he was truly a beggar. A drunkard would have held out for money, not figs. "You see the condition of my leg," the man replied, taking a mouthful of the juicy fig. "Labor is very difficult for me. I am unproductive and no one wants to hire me." "So you're not an Israelite then?" Solomon asked, knowing that an Israelite would have a family with inheritance land. "An Israelite? Why, yes, I am an Israelite from Issachar." "And where is your family's estate?" Solomon asked. "Certainly you could work there." The man replied, eyeing the stranger curiously. "You must just be passing through this area." Then the beggar noticed the shepherd's staff in Solomon's hand and was struck with, perhaps, the true intent of his questioning. "Would you hire me, my lord?" he asked. "I cannot walk very well, but given a donkey to ride, I could tend flocks." Solomon observed the man's eager, desperate expression and pitied him. "Brother, if I had flocks here, perhaps that could be arranged," he replied. "But if you were reconciled to your family, you would not need to work for a stranger. What stands in the way of that?" The man shook his head. "I am not in conflict with my family.
he replied. My brothers have moved out of this area to make lives for themselves elsewhere. I alone remain here so that perhaps one day— His voice trailed off as he stared out into space, munching on the second of the figs. The other beggars were watching the exchange carefully. Solomon was curious about the rest of the story. His years on the judgment seat had cast his mind into the habit of seeking out the answers to situations as he encountered them. Instinctively, he believed that if he knew the circumstances, he could help the man. "What is your name, if you don't mind?" Solomon asked kindly, rousing the man from his thought. "My name?" he asked, as if it were a question he was not often asked. "My name is Jared." "Well, Jared," Solomon said, "you are an Israelite, as am I. That makes us brothers, even if your tribal brothers have moved away, as you say. If you tell me the rest of your story, perhaps I can be of some assistance. But even if not, what have you lost?" The man nodded. "I can see, my lord, that you are not from this place, and if you wish to stay here with your flocks for any measure of time, there are things you should know." Solomon observed the man expertly. The longer he talked with him, the less he seemed like a beggar. More like a worthy man, perhaps even an educated man, someone who had been displaced by some strange circumstance that he did not want to tell. "I want to hear the story, whether I stay or not," Solomon said loudly enough for the whole group to hear. Looking up at them, he pulled out the bag of trail foods and tossed it in their direction. One scampered forward and caught it, then began excitedly inspecting the contents and passing them among his companions. "What is this thing that I need to know?" Solomon asked, looking back at the man again. The man looked at the other beggars, questioningly. One of them motioned for him to speak. Turning back to Solomon, he straightened and declared, "My lord, the ancient landmarks in this place are in need of redemption. My family has land here, as do most of us, good land. When our fathers first came to this place, they discovered that a large portion of it was unplantable. Down below," he motioned toward the valley, "is a marsh unfit for planting or for grazing animals, while up above," he motioned toward the hills, "it is too dry to plant. There are no springs. But in between, the land produces like Eden itself. Our father set the landmarks so that each family would have plantable land. But in our generation, the good land has been purchased for the years remaining until Jubilee, leaving my family only with that land which is unfit for planting." "The land has been purchased?" Solomon asked, his instincts as a judge rising up. "By whom?" The man looked around nervously up and down the street. Then he leaned forward and whispered, "By a man named Bel Haman. He is a rich and powerful man who lives in this area." "And what of Haman's own land?" "That is just it, my lord. Haman is not an Israelite, though he poses as one. He is entitled to no land here, the truth be known. But he has claimed our land here as his own, purchased it." "But Jubilee is some years off, and crops are prospering. Can no one redeem the land?" The man shook his head. "They cannot, my lord. Haman bought the years at a reduced price during a famine, but will only allow redemption at full price. No one here can raise that much." Solomon shook his head. What kind of foreigner could wield such power over Israelites? It could not happen without the cooperation of Israelite judges, who must have something to gain from it all. It appeared that there was real work for him to do in this town after all. "But, please, my lord," the man spoke again, moving in close, "you did not hear this from me." The street was now almost devoid of travelers. It had cleared out rather quickly. The sound of music could be heard inside an open doorway up the street. Solomon leaned down and then pressed the loaf of bread he had purchased into the beggar's chest, who took it and looked up questioningly. "Jared," Solomon said in a low voice, "I have seen fools riding horses while princes walk on the ground. Be assured, I will not, through indiscreet talk, multiply the undeserved troubles of a worthy man. I'm only staying in this place for a short while, and I pray that God gives you justice and success. But this I charge you to remember.
There is justice in Israel, if taken before a high enough court. Haman may be powerful here, but there are powers greater than he.
I believe that, my lord,
the man answered.
But justice comes slowly to a remote place like this. Until then, we must guard our steps.
Yes, of course, Solomon replied, pausing to stare at the man most peculiarly, an expression that did not go unnoticed by Jared. In truth, Solomon was fighting off a strong instinct to act on the situation immediately. Looking up at the group of beggars, Solomon said, "I will see you again." He spurred his donkey forward, and the group chorused gratitude as he rode off.